What's going on, everyone, and welcome to my SKS Frost Vortex build. This is one of the new weapons the devs just introduced with the new release of Lunar, and I'm so excited to make this build for y'all. So without further ado, let's get into it. Looking at the weapon itself, we have to go over what is Frost Vortex, because that is very important because the devs did recently change this about a month ago. So Frost Vortex, you trap enemies within a 4.5 meter radius and inflict 50% PSI intensity as status damage per half a second for 4 seconds, and only up to 1 Frost Vortexes may exist at any time. So this was recently changed about a month ago. Frost Vortex did receive a massive buff, so that status damage per half a second used to be 1 second, and as well that up to 1 Frost Vortexes used to be able to proc more than 1 Frost Vortex. However, they changed it, but now that 1 Frost Vortex deals as much damage as 3 Frost Vortexes does. So it is a pretty big buff for Frost Vortex. As well, the additional damage is Frost Element, which cannot crit and it cannot strike weak spots. Alright, so getting into how the weapon actually works, and this weapon is a little bit complicated with the way that it works, but we're going to break it down and test everything. So the SKS Pathfinder, it triggers Frost Vortex on hit with a cooldown of 5 seconds. Each hit reduces the cooldown by 1 second. So that means when you shoot this weapon, it is going to instantly proc Frost Vortex, and it will not proc another Frost Vortex until the 5-second timer is up. Now, if you keep on shooting at the enemy, every single hit that you get on the enemy is going to reduce that by 1 second. And of how fast this weapon actually shoots, you're going to be proccing Frost Vortex on repeat. So really that 5-second cooldown isn't really relevant as much, and it's kind of like an infinite Frost Vortex proc weapon. Alright, and so this weapon has a 60% chance per hit to generate a deviant particle. Picking them up puts you in a charged state. Now you can hold a maximum of 10 of these, and when you are in the charging state, you consume these deviated particles for a charged shot, launching a penetrating ice spike, dealing ice elemental damage equal to 110% attack. Very important, remember that. Which benefits from Frost Vortex damage bonus. And the last part is PvP, don't worry about that part. So what that means is as you are proccing Frost Vortex and as you are shooting the enemy, okay, you're going to be getting these little orbs, these little balls, I want to say. It's a really weird way to put it, but these little balls that you can pick up. And when you pick up these balls, you are going to get into a charged state. And next time you go to shoot an enemy with those balls in your possession, you are going to proc an icicle spike that is going to just do a massive amount of damage to the enemy. And it's really weird how it works. You don't really have a whole lot of control over the ice spike itself. It does do pretty good damage, and it can also crit, which we will be getting into that in just a little bit actually. But the important things here is that when you pick up these little particles, right, you will be dealing a huge chunk of just an ice spike damage. And now the other big things about this is that this benefits from ice elemental damage as well as Frost Vortex damage. So those two are what's going to determine your actual ice spikes damage. You get into the last part of the weapon, you get a base 30% increase in ice elemental damage. That's just a nice little 30% increase and buff. You can never go wrong with that. Each charge shot increases ice elemental damage by 8% for 15 seconds, which stacks up to 3 times. So as you're picking up those particles, you will be getting an additional 8% for 15 seconds, which can stack up to 3 times. So every single time that you are shooting off one of those charge shots, you can get up to an additional 24% elemental damage on top of that base 30% that you're already getting. So really, this is a really weird built weapon, but it does a lot of damage. It's actually super fun to use. Alright, so getting into the weapons mod, we will be running Cryo Catalyst, which Cryo Catalyst will give you Frost Vortex damage plus 10%. That is just a nice little base 10% increase in Frost Vortex damage. And after triggering Frost Construct, which is the spikes, missiles, crystals, in this weapon's case it would be the missiles, you will gain an additional 5% Vortex damage for 6 seconds. So this will give you a pretty steady 15% increase in Frost Vortex damage. Now for most Frost weapons, you would run Cryoblast, and this weapon does proc Vortex really often on repeat. but you can get up to 20% Frost Vortex damage with the Cryoblast. However, it's not really as reliable as the Frost Construct is, so I would definitely go for the Frost Construct version of it. And as well, you can also run Frosty Blessing if you were doing Nightmare Silos, or even in the new Lunar scenario where your HP is super low. This mod actually isn't bad at all. I've actually used this a good couple of times, and yeah, you're losing 15% frost damage. However, the HP that you get back with this mod is kind of crazy because you're proccing Frost Vortex on repeat, so you're getting like infinite heals and you don't lose that much damage. It's actually not that big of a loss. So if you struggle with dying or low HP builds, you can run this. This is actually not a bad option. Sometimes I actually do prefer the Frosty Blessing over the Frost Construct. And for the mod suffix, you are going to want to run this in a Frost Vortex affix. Now, when you go over here to your mod section and you click on attributes, you can actually see what your options could be. So you are guaranteed the Frost Vortex damaged as a fixed attribute. Now, you do want to try to get this frost damage percent right here. Trigger chance is okay, duration's okay. Really, you want that frost damage. That's the biggest one. So frost damage and Frost Vortex damage, and you'll be set. All right, so getting up into calibration, and this still surprises me that they made this a sniper rifle and not an auto rifle, because I just don't understand the logic behind that, but it's fine. So for the calibration, we will be running a frugal style, which will give you, if you miss a shot, you gain 15% attack. So there's not really a point in running rapid style because there's no bolt on this sniper rifle, whatever. So you just want to run the frugal for that extra 15% attack in case you miss a bullet. And as well, we are running this in double elemental because elemental benefits this weapon significantly for that Frost Vortex. All right, so moving on to the weapon's attachments. So this weapon has pretty good overall stats. However, we're going to try to be increasing that range and the stability on this weapon. So for the muzzle, you will want to run the large break, which will give you more range and accuracy. For the optic, you are going to want to run the Raptor optic sight. This doesn't do much for you. This just gives you more range. Because once again, I don't know why this is a sniper, but it is. However, if you did not want to run the Raptor optic sight, you could just run the compact reflex sight for more stability. However, the range increase on this sight is significant and it won't benefit you otherwise. However, the Raptor optic sight is more beneficial just because of that range. And for the tactics, we will be running the tactical laser sight, which will make your accuracy at 100. And then getting into the magazine, there's no question about it. We are going to be running the Tactical SR Mag. This is just going to give you plus 15 reload speed and 7 mobility. You can never go wrong with that. I mean, you don't get any more ammo. And then getting into the ammo, which is pretty big, gives you a little bit damage boost. So we will be running the Disintegrating Sniper Rifle AP ammo because it would deal 10% more damage to targets affected by burn or Frost Vortex. So it's just a straight 10% increase in damage when your enemies are affected by the Frost Vortex. Now this ammo is very, very expensive. Okay, especially since it's a sniper rifle, you will not be able to make a whole lot of this unless you were just rich on Stardust. I think these 7,000 bullets right here costed me over 40k Stardust to make. So if you cannot make these, the normal AP tungsten ammo is perfectly okay. Or even the blue tungsten is perfectly fine. This weapon eats ammo like worse than the Icy Rain does. But it's really good. It's really good. Just a little heads up. Alright, so getting into your secondary weapon that you want to run with the SKS, you're going to want to run the Bingo, which the Bingo is just there for the bullseye proc. And the reason we run the Bingo and not like the D50 Wildfire is because as soon as you pull out the Bingo, it will instantly proc bullseye. So you can quickly swap to this weapon, proc bullseye, and it will instantly proc that bullseye. So this is a really, really nice weapon to have. I've been running the Bingo recently on a lot of my builds instead of the D50. But both of them are really good. As long as you are proccing that bullseye, it does not matter as much. But the Bingo with the food item that we're going to be going over later on in the video will give you a huge, huge damage buff. So I highly recommend running this weapon. Alright, so getting into your melee weapon, and yes, I cannot pronounce the name correctly. Somebody always leaves a comment in the chat that says, you said Kurigi, and I'm like, well, I can't pronounce the name correctly, but you know what I'm talking about. So basically the Kurigi, when you defeat a target, it grants all weapons attack plus 30%, and as well you would get additional crit rate plus 15% for 10 seconds. Now that 30% attack is going to be huge for us, and that crit rate can as well be beneficial, which we're going to go over that later on, because there will be two different builds that you can run for this, a crit version and an elemental version. But for now, we are just focused mainly on that 30% attack that we will be getting. And as well, when you defeat enemy with a heavy strike, you will gain 20% PSI intensity, which is also huge because Frost Vortex depends on your PSI intensity as well. So this is a really big buff, and you can easily get this by just meleeing an ice cube. And once you melee, just switch to bingo, shoot, and then switch back to your weapon. It's GG. I mean, you're going to do a crap ton of damage at that point. All right, and so getting into the gear sets for the SKS that you want to run. So there will be two different sets that we will be covering. One of them will be for more survivability if you were inside a Lunar server. And then the second gear set is based off of the shield-based meta that is new to this Visional Wheels scenario, which is Lunar. And OnceHuman's never had something like this, so the whole shield-based thing is a new kind of thing. However, it does work very well, and both of these builds are going to work tremendously no matter what you are doing. And so getting in the first gear set, we will be running a 3-piece Savior set, followed by a 2-piece Treacherous Tide set. Now, the Savior set did recently just get changed this season, so it works a little bit differently, but it works favorably in terms of the shield-based meta. So at 2 pieces, you will get weapon damage and status damage plus 10% while shielded. That's just any percent of shield that you have. And at 3 pieces, consumes 8% of current HP upon hit to generate a temporary shield equal to 5% of max HP, lasting for 30 seconds. So when this does stack up, it can stack up to 4 times, giving you an additional 5% weapon and status damage. So in total, you can get a total of 20% extra status and weapon damage. So that puts us at 30% weapon and status damage. As well, you will be getting those shields based off of your weapon hits. So you're getting 2 big bonuses to this. And as you can see in this clip here, as I am shooting this enemy, you can see the shields just passively generating. And as well, if I pull out my Deviant, I will get another shield stack. So this is how this gear set works. And as well, if I go over here and check my stats, you can see that I do have those percent increases from the Savior set. And as well, we are getting 12% weapon and status damage from the 2-piece Treacherous Tide set as well. All right, so getting into the second gear set that you can run for the SKS build, and this is going to get more into the more survivability, so you don't have to rely on shields to boost you up. And that is going to be with a 3-piece Treacherous Tide set, followed by a 2-piece Savior set. Now you could unequip one of the Savior pieces, and you could put back on a 4th piece of Treacherous Tide for that 20% shield bonus that you're going to be getting, which that would help even more. And Treacherous Tide set was literally made for Lunar. Like, this set was made specifically for Lunar, and it's really, really good. I'm not going to go through the whole entire thing. However, at 2 pieces, you do get 12% status damage when your HP is below 70%. You also do get that 12% weapon damage. And then at 3 pieces, you can get up to 28%. So in total, you would be getting 40% status damage and weapon damage, which is really, really good, extremely strong. And especially during Lunar, when your sanity is already going to drop, you pretty much don't have to do anything because you are going to be at the maximum amount of sanity that you need to get that full 40% buff. And we are running this with a 2-piece Savior set just because of that medical cooldown haste that's going to allow you to heal faster, and as well as that second piece, which while shielded, weapon damage and status damage dealt increases by 10%. So on top of that 40% that you're going to be getting from the Treacherous Tide set, you will as well be getting another 10%. And they just recently changed the Savior set, and it's really, really good. It's actually going to go very well with the Cradle that we're going to get into. However, if you did not want to run the 3-piece Savior set and you just wanted to run the 4-piece Treacherous Tide set, it is a viable option and it is nowhere near bad at all. you will do insane damage still, just as you would with the Savior shield-based set. Alright, so getting into the key gear for the build, so there will be two different pieces we're going to be talking about. The first one is going to be the new piece of key gear, which is called the Snowdrift Top, which this was literally made exactly for this specific weapon. And what this does is when picking up deviated particles, you gain an additional charge stack and weapon and status damage plus 25% for 25 seconds. So as you can see now, and I'm sure you've been seeing, is that when we're picking up these little deviated particles, we're expending them by shooting missiles. So when wearing this piece of key gear, we're basically doubling the amount of balls, I guess I want to say, we pick up. Plus we are getting a straight 25% status and weapon damage boost every single time you pick one up for 25 seconds. Alright, so getting into the second key piece that you can wear, and this is one of my personal favorite, just overall Frost Vortex key gears that you can wear, and that would be the Frost Vortex Walker shirt, which what this is going to do is when you trigger Frost Vortex, it is going to make a little Frost Vortex right in the middle of where you procced it, and it's going to keep pulling in all these enemies, and it is so strong. Yet you don't do as much damage as you would of other key items. However, the amount of crowd control that you get with this key item is stupidly overpowered to the point where nothing will ever touch you. And as you see in these clips here, it's just, I don't have words for how useful this key item is. Because you don't have to worry about the damage as long as you just, I mean, they can't touch you. So they're all just getting stuck in the middle, and it's so much fun. And I use this quite a bit if I'm using a Frost Vortex weapon inside Nightmare Silos. And it's just, it's one of the easiest key items you can be using in general. Alright, and so getting into the mods for the crit side of the build. So for the crit build for the helmet, we are running Fateful Strike. Now, Fateful Strike, you cannot deal weak spot damage, but you get crit rate plus 10% and crit damage plus 30%. Now, that cannot deal weak spot damage. Don't worry about that too much because you still will be dealing weak spot damage. And we are running this one in a Lunar suffix, and we want weapon damage and crit damage on this as well. And if you do not want to run Fateful Strike, you can as well run Weapon Symphony, which can actually do more damage than Fateful Strike can. You just have to swap your weapon, and you will get that weapon damage plus 25% with a fire rate of plus 10% as well. Now, this does decay really quickly. However, if you're just doing like a single boss fight, this would do more damage than the Fateful Strike would. And then moving on over to the mass mod, we will be running Frostwave Wither. Now, Frostwave Wither, Frost Vortex's final damage plus 30%, which decreases by 8% per second over time. Now, there was between this one and the Frost Construct one, and I chose the Frostwave Wither just because I don't have a good Frost Construct. Technically, both of them are really good mods. You could use either or. Now, you do proc Frost Vortex extremely often, so I wouldn't worry about that 8% decaying over time, because by the time that 1 second is over, you will have another Frost Vortex. So that is a pretty consistent 30% increase in the final damage of Frost Vortex. Now moving on over to the chest mod, and this is a really important piece of the entire build. So this is if you're running a 3-piece Savior set, this will help you significantly, which we are running Rejuvenating, which when shield is above 30% of max HP, defeating an enemy recovers 20% of max HP, which excess recovery is converted into shield, lasting for 20 seconds. So all that's really saying is that when your shield is at 30% and you kill an enemy, basically you're technically supposed to get back HP. However, we're not going to be getting back HP, and the whole goal is to just keep getting your shields stacked up. So between this mod and the Savior set and the Cradle that we're going to go over in just a minute, you are going to have maxed out shields, and you're going to have them up consistently. And this is the shield based meta, and it is actually so good. And I never thought OnceHuman would come to this, but. And now going over to the pants mod, we will be running Deadshot. Now Deadshot, each crit hit by non-melee weapons grants 5% crit damage up to 45%. Now, like I said, the only thing that can actually crit on this weapon is those little ice missiles that you shoot, but you do shoot them extremely often. So those can crit, and they will keep on hitting the enemy on repeat. So every single time they do, you will get that increase in crit damage. Now we are running this one in a balance suffix for the crit build. So you're looking for crit damage and weapon damage for this mod. And for the gloves, we will be running crit amplifier, which will give you crit rate plus 10% and crit damage plus 15%. Now, the reason we're running crit amp and not the crit boost is because that 15% crit damage is more beneficial than the 5% crit rate. Now, if you are running the full crit build, you really don't need the crit boost. You can get away with crit amp. That 5% crit rate is not going to kill you. It's really not. And we are running this one in a violence suffix. We did have really good crit damage and weapon damage on this. They do have new mods this season as well. Instead of the violent suffixes, you can get crescent mods, which will base off of your shield. And then getting a boost mod, which is going to make up for a lot of damage. And this is one of the reasons why the 3-piece savior is actually going to do way more damage than the 3-piece treacherous tide set is going to do. Every 10% HP loss grants 4% melee weapon and status damage. We honestly don't care about the melee damage. That's useless. However, the weapon and status damage is going to be huge. So when it says every 10%, technically that means you can get up to 40% extra increase in weapon and status damage. However, you would have to be at 0 HP, which I'm assuming everybody knows you'd be dead. So we can't get there. However, we can get to 99% HP decrease, which is going to give us that 36% increase in weapon and status damage, which is still huge, and that is still perfectly more than enough. And we are running this one as well in a downstar suffix, and we do have crit damage and weapon damage on this mod. Alright, so getting into the elemental mods for the build. So we will be running Deviation Expert, which will give you fire rate plus 10% with status damage plus 20%. Now, I have heard a good few people say the status damage does not matter. That is not true. Frost Vortex is literally status damage. It just also benefits from element damage, which is the frost damage. So this is going to boost your Frost Vortex damage by 20%, which is always beneficial. And we are running this one in a Lunar suffix, and we do have that elemental damage on it, as well as that status damage on it. So now getting into the mass mod for the elemental build. So we will be running Frostwave Wither, which will give you Frost Vortex's final damage plus 30%, decreasing by 8% per second over time. So we are going to be constantly proccing Frost Vortex on repeat over and over and over. So we're not really going to be losing damage that significantly. However, if you do want to switch this for the Ice Construct one, you can as well, and you will gain more damage with your ice missiles with that one. But the important thing is, as long as you run it inside a Frost Vortex suffix for that Frost Vortex damage and that frost damage. And for the chest mod, we will be running Rejuvenating, which is also the same for the crit build. So when shield is above 30% of max HP, defeating an enemy recovers 20% of max HP. Excess recovery is converted into shield, lasting 20 seconds. So that means all of the health that we're supposed to be getting back from this mod, we're going to get back in just straight shields. And it's really, really good, especially if you want to max out all your shields. I would highly recommend this mod. And this is part of the new shield meta that is part of the new season. So you're most likely going to be running this mod for almost every single build. And it is really, really, really good. And as well, we are running this in a Lunar suffix for the elemental damage and that status damage. And for the pants mod, we will be running Abnormal Increase. Now, this is kind of weird for the sniper rifle, just because there's not really a whole bunch of good elemental mods you can really run for this rifle. I keep saying rifle, but it's a sniper rifle, but I keep thinking it's like an auto rifle because of how fast it fires. But anyways, so when the magazine is empty, status damage plus 10% for 12 seconds. The effect can stack up to 3 times, so you will be reloading really, really quickly. So you will be getting a constant 30% increase in your status damage as well. Now for the pants mod, you can get this in a downstar suffix, which is what I would recommend over the talent suffix for even more elemental and status damage. I have a decent roll on my talents, however, so I am just using a talent roll, but I would definitely recommend going downstar if possible. And for the gloves mod, we will be running Elemental Overload, which is just going to give you a base 18% increase in your element damage, which that just means frost damage, and you can never go wrong with that. And we are running this one in a talent suffix for the element damage and that status damage. So as you can see here, we're just stacking up our element damage and our status damage. to make this weapon proc as hard and as much as they can. And this is the benefit of using an elemental weapon, because it might not do as much damage as the crit, just straight raw damage to bosses, but the elemental version will always win in situations where there's like a group of enemies, like nightmare silos or just big things like that. The elemental versions of these builds will always be better compared to the crit versions of them. And then for the boots mod, we are running Rush Hour once again. We are running this one in a downstar suffix. And what Rush Hour does is every 10% HP loss, you get 4% weapon and status damage and melee damage, but we honestly do not care about that melee damage. However, we will be at 1% HP for the majority of this build if you choose to go the savior route. So you will be getting a total of 36% status weapon damage, which, I mean, you can never go wrong with that. It's only a 4% difference, and it's 36% is still huge. That beats almost any mod in the whole game, and it's absolutely crazy. But we are running this mod in a downstar suffix for that status damage and that elemental damage. Okay, so getting into the Cradle that you want to run for this build. So the Cradle did just recently change with the new Lunar servers, so it'll be a little bit different than the previous ones. So for the first one, you want to run Anti-Phase, Status Enhancement, Tactical Combo, Elemental Sense, Extreme Freezing, and these are some of the new ones that I'm about to show on the screen, which are the Deviant Energy Defense, which this one is going to give you 30% shield, which is going to benefit your 3-piece savior set. And you do want to run the shield protection, because when you are at 40% shield, you will get 10% more damage against enemies. And for the last option, depending on if you are doing a Nightmare Silo, I would pick Anti-Void or Anti-Coherence depending on the Nightmare Silo that you were doing. Now, if you aren't doing a Nightmare Silo and you were just doing like Lunar or just in general activities, you could go for something like March Strike or even Bounty Hunter, or if you really even wanted to, Energy Surge to get your Deviant back faster during Lunar. I normally do run a lot of Nightmare Silos, so I do usually put one of these on as well, but if I don't have one of these on and I'm not running a Nightmare Silo, I would just put on Mark Strike, just because you get that extra 20% damage bonus against targets of Bullseye. So this is the Cradle that you want to run. This will significantly help you with your shields as well, specifically these two perks. Alright, and so getting into your food buffs that you would want to run with this weapon. So starting with the drink buffs, you will want to run the Whimsical Drink. Now you want to run this one regardless if you are a chef class or not, because this will give you an additional 42% status damage, which Frost Vortex is status damage, so that's going to be a significant boost right there. And as well, if you are a chef class, you can pair this with the double jump drink. And then getting into the food buffs for the build. So with the return of Lunar, the roulette dumplings have made a comeback, and the roulette dumplings are by far the best food buffs in the entire game. They will give you 20% damage against elite enemies, bosses, and deviants. Now, these do not work inside Nightmare Silos, Monoliths, or anything like that. You will only get one of these buffs. However, during the Lunar cycle, you will get all three of these buffs. So if you were just doing Lunar, I would highly suggest, if you only had one buff for any build just in general, I would definitely pick the roulette dumplings 100%. Now, if you are doing Nightmare Silos or Monoliths, you can just run the Mixed Fried Hot Dog, which will give you a nice 20% increase to your bullseye damage. That's going to be the best option. It will significantly increase the SKS's damage as well. Now, if you are a chef class, you can pair the Mixed Fried Hot Dog or the dumplings with something like the Surprise Spring Rolls, which will give you a huge elemental damage bonus, which actually doubles when you're below a certain percent of HP, which is going to be extremely often due to our shield-based set. So really, you are getting a massive elemental damage boost, as well as a bullseye damage boost or a roulette dumpling boost. So all these options are really good. It just depends if you are a chef class or not. All right, and so getting into the deviations that you want to use. So there'll be two different deviations that you can use. Both of them are just preferable to whichever playstyle that you like. So for the first deviation, we have the Polar Jelly, which will deal frost status damage to surrounding enemies. All right, and it will increase your frost damage by 39%. And it will also increase your frost damage. In my case, since I have a level 5 Polar Jelly, he will increase my status damage by 39.2%. And if Frost Vortexes are formed inside the radius, he will also create ice spikes that will proc and hit the enemy as well. This is a really good high burst DPS option, and I really do like the Polo Jelly for a lot of things. The only bad thing about the Polo Jelly is that he's stationary and he can't move. So it's kind of like a single target type situation, but he is super, super good. And then getting in the second deviation that you can run, we have the Lone Wolf, which the Lone Wolf did recently just get a massive buff as well. So Lone Wolf will give you 50% more weapon damage against targets that it attacks. And that's not all. It also takes aggro for you. And that is really, really big, especially in Nightmare Silos. If you struggle with enemies just bombarding you, the Lone Wolf is fantastic for that. And in my personal opinion, I would pick the Lone Wolf for every single build if I had the choice, because he's just that good. And the Lunar Wolves are now returned with the introduction of Lunar Oracle, which will give you an additional 5% weapon damage. So these are very, very nice, and I really do like my Lone Wolf quite a bit. And in my case, he does give me 50% more weapon damage because he is level 5, and he's just great. He can do everything pretty much. But that is going to be it for my SKS build. This was truly one of the funnest builds I think I've ever made, and I did not expect this weapon to be this strong. I would easily say this is definitely one of the top damage weapons in the game at the moment, which is really crazy to say seeing how it's Frost Vortex. But I mean, there's no denying that the damage this thing does is just straight raw DPS, and the amount of crowd control you can get from it, as well as you want to go healing, you can go for it. I mean, you can pick so many different roles to this weapon. It's absolutely insane. But I really do hope you guys enjoyed. I will be making another build video very, very soon, as well as a few other videos. So if you enjoyed, or if you have any questions, just leave a comment below. And I appreciate all of y'all, and I will see y'all in the next one.